Hello and welcome to this tutorial on R programming for data science, R programming for beginners. In this tutorial we'll be learning about the different operations that we can do with vectors. Now first of all, let us revise what we learned in the previous tutorial. What we did is we learned about vectors, and for creating vectors we used three functions. The first one is C, which stands for combine, and what does this function C does is it combines these three numbers into the vector A. Now let us see another function, that is sec function or sequence function. And what does it do is it creates a sequence of numbers that is described inside the small brackets, and it inserts those numbers into the vector which is prescribed ahead. And the last function we learned about is the REP function. And what does REP function does is it repeats the variable present ahead to the desired number of times. Now in previous tutorial we also learned about the square brackets, and it represents that this number 1 inside this square bracket represents that this 3 is the first element of the series, and this number 36 represents that this 3 is the 36th element of the series. So now in this video let us first learn how we can access a particular element inside a vector. So first of all, what we are going to do is we are going to create a vector. Let us name it CHA, and inside the vector we are going to combine characters. Now let us run it and let us check how we can access the individual element in this vector. For example, let us suppose we want to access this element A in the vector CHA, and for that what we are going to do is we are going to use the square brackets. In the previous tutorial we learned that these square brackets are used to indicate the position of an element within a vector. Now we know that the positioning of elements in R programming starts from the number 1. So what we are going to do is, in order to access this element A, we are going to type CHA, and then in square brackets we are going to give 1, and as you can see we get the result A. Now suppose we want all the elements except the first element, and we want to code that into a vector B. So for that what we are going to do is we are going to use the -1, and let us print out the vector B, and as you can see it contains all the element of the vector CHA without the first element, which is A. That means the minus sign can also be used in order to omit a element within a vector. For example, let us say we want to see the elements of this vector CHA without the second and third element. So what we'll do is we'll give -2, -3, and as you can see we got an error for incorrect number of dimensions. Now we got that error because either we need to put in a sequence, or what we need to do is we need to combine these two, and then we'll run this line and as you can see, we will get the result that is desired. So from this illustration, we know that not only we need to use vectors in a variable, but we also need to use vectors in order to access the elements within a vector. For example, let us suppose we want the elements from first to third of this vector CHA, and for that what we can do is either we can use the colon operator to describe a sequence, or what we can do is we can use the seq function to describe a sequence, or what we can do is we can use the combine function to say that we need the characters which are in the first, second and third place of the vector CHA, and all of this will give us the same result, that is ABC. Now since we all learned how we can access individual elements from a vector, let's look into different operations with vectors. So these are the two vectors and we want to perform some operations with them. For example, let us suppose we want to add them. So in that case what we need to do is we need to add these two elements, then we need to add these two elements, and again these two elements, again these two elements, which means we need to add the corresponding elements of the two vectors and we need to place them in a third vector, and the elements of the third vector will be the addition of the first and second vectors. And similar is with the case with subtraction. And suppose we also want to check which of these two vectors is greater. Suppose we want to check if this vector is greater than this vector. So in that case what R does is it gives us a third vector which is a logical vector which contains true and false statement of each and every element, whether the corresponding element of this vector is greater than the corresponding element of this vector or not. Now up to these examples we are using both the vectors of same size, and what will happen if both the vectors are not of same size? In this case what R does is replicates the smaller vector in order to make both the vectors of equal elements. Now in this case bigger vector is the multiple of a smaller vector. So what will happen if the bigger vector is not a multiple of smaller vector? So in that case what R does is it still uses the first elements in order to fulfill the number of elements, but it also shows you a warning sign stating that the bigger vector is not a multiple of smaller vector, but it will still give you the results. So let us see some examples. We'll open a new R script and we'll clear the environment. In this R script we'll describe the two vectors A and B, and we'll simply put the results of their addition in vector C. And if we print out the vector C, we can see that it contains the result of addition of the elements of vector A and B. Now let us create a vector A with 5 random numbers, and if we print A, then we can see the result of those random numbers. Now suppose we want to access each and every element of this vector. For that we can either use the square brackets in this way, or what we can do is we can also use the for loop. Then we can get the elements of A individually. Now what this loop is doing is it is First of all, we are assuming that I falls in the vector A, and then what we are doing is we are giving the command to print I, which means it is similar like we are using the print function in individual elements of A. Now using this for loop, it's similar to using this 5 commands in order to print the elements of A. Now why I explained this to you is in order for you to learn about the vectorized and devectorized operations. So what does this vectorized operation means? So let us assume n to be 100. So in such case what we will do is we will create a vector A with n number of random numbers, and similarly we will create a vector B with n number of random numbers. In order to get the multiplication of A and B, we can simply write A times B. Now in case of devectorized approach, what we'll do is we'll create a vector X which contains n number of blank spaces. Now what we'll do is we'll create a for loop. Now what's happened in this for loop is, first of all, we have got a vector X which contains n number of blank spaces, and now what we are giving command to R is, suppose I ranges from 1 to n, and in that case what we want R to do is we want to multiply the I element of A and I element of B and put the result in I element of X. Now if we run this command, what will happen is we'll get the same result, but the devectorized approach is longer and quite time consuming than the vectorized approach. Now step by step we are moving from the basic operations in R to the advanced operations in R, and in the next video we will be focusing on the different functions and packages that we can use in R. Thank you.